Thank you, everybody, for joining us. There have been so many insightful articles about the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic will have on Jewish life. And I was particularly moved by Andres Spokoiny's essay in Tablet, which resonates so deeply with Pardes's vision for Jewish life. Andres is the president and CEO of the Jewish Funders Network. And in the essay, he issued an urgently needed call to funders and to the Jewish community at large to invest in Jewish ideas, in journeys of religious exploration, and in deep Jewish learning. Andres writes, places where ideas are produced and circulated need to be supported as much as other Jewish organizations. And he writes about the opportunities for Jewish spiritual transformation that this pandemic can bring about. I've admired Andres's writings and leadership from afar. We haven't met personally. We'll be meeting right here for the first time on Zoom. And after reading his essay, I wanted to engage with him personally, since his diagnosis of the American Jewish community is one that we at Pardes share. This summer, we have had about 150 students in each of our 2 summer sessions. And as part of this last week of our second summer session, we wanted to bring this conversation to you, our summer students, as well as to our alumni and friends. So let me briefly introduce Andres. Andres Spokoiny is a longtime Jewish communal leader with a history of leading successful organizational transformations. He served as the CEO of the Federation in Montreal, and prior to that, Andres worked for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee in Paris. Before his Jewish communal work, Andres worked for IBM and was responsible for training, development, hiring, and recruitment for IBM's Latin America Southern region during a period of major restructuring. He's originally from Argentina, and Andres has a multidisciplinary academic background, which includes business, education, and rabbinical studies in different institutions around the world. Thank you so much for being with us, Andres.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the work of Pardes for many years. I actually first get to know the work of Pardes when I had more hair and when the hair was darker, and I've since admired it. I think it's a great opportunity. So when Leon called me, I felt deeply honored to be asked to discuss that article with you. I would say that it's also a pleasure to be talking about something that doesn't have to do with donors and fundraising and how to get more funds during the pandemic. This is what people most want to hear from me these days, given the fact that I work for the Jewish Funders Network and I have that view of the donor community. And we can talk about that if you want, but I think I actually think that the issue of philanthropy and the issue of meaning are deeply related, deeply related. So I'm not going to touch on that too.
Beautiful. Andres, I want you to give us initially the Torah Sheba'al Peh version of your powerful essay, the oral Torah version, and to share with us the ideas that you see in American Jewish life from your perch.
Yeah. So as usual, the drash is going to be longer than the pshat. I see that Debbie Weissman is here, one of my dear teachers from the Melton Center, and I'm probably going to say one thing that that Debbie taught me 25 years ago, and I hope I give it I do it honor. So the drash of my article is this. It starts from the point of view that the ideological scaffolding of the Jewish world, in other words, the ideologies and beliefs that structure the Jewish experience today are at least 100 years old. They are the responses that the Jewish world crafted to the crisis that modernity and the 19th century imposed on them. So think about it this way. All the Jewish ideologies, all the denominations that organize Jewish life today are all product of Central Europe, 19th century. Reform was created in 1810 in Germany, conservative 1830s, orthodoxy around the same time, Chabad 1814. The Jewish world has not produced a single ideology in terms of thinking the nature of God, the nature of the Jewish people, the nature of society, the nature of the human condition since Mordechai Kaplan. Yes, we had Heschel that added some elements with sort of a neo-mysticism, but ultimately the last update, the last upgrade to our ideological software is from the 1920s. The Judaism as a Civilization, the landmark book of Mordechai Kaplan, is from 1924. So here we are in a world that has changed enormously, but our tools to deal with the change are tools that are at the very least 100 years ago, 100 years old. So onto that crisis, we add COVID, right? So you take a system that was already in dire need of renewal, and on top you have a massive universal wide brush with death. You have a situation where, I mean, think about it this way. Never in the history of humanity, 3 billion people simultaneously were locked in their homes for months. Never. Like, never we had a global pandemic that so fast spread throughout the world, and never we had the entire world experiencing the same thing at the same time. So humanity doesn't go through an experience like that without asking itself a few questions afterwards. In other words, if as an individual, every time, God forbid, a loved one dies, or you experience a near-death situation, you start rethinking a lot of things. Lachat kama v'chama, when 3 billion people or 7 billion people are actually going through the same experience. So, and by the way, and this is what happened in history. After every major pandemic, we had a major spiritual reckoning. In many cases, it was anti-religious or anti-spiritual, like after the Spanish flu. After the Spanish flu, of course, there's many causes, right? But after it's not a coincidence that after the war and the Spanish flu, you had the growth of secular organization, of secular ideologies. After the Black Death in Europe, we had the Reformation, we had a lot of heretical movements, and we had eventually the Renaissance, who was very humanistic in nature, right? And that's not only in the Western world. In Japan, for example, in the 7th century, there was a big smallpox epidemic that determined that Japan, after that, moved to Buddhism. Sort of the general move of Japan to Buddhism happened after the smallpox epidemic. So as Jews, we have that perfect storm. We have a whole ideological apparatus that was already obsolete. And I'm being, a little extreme. It's not that, they're not fully obsolete. And of course, people have tried to change them. But, to make the point, I'm pulling it a little bit towards an extreme. We did have denominations that don't mean much for most of the Jews. I mean, I grew up as a conservative Jew. Do I feel myself as a conservative Jew today? I don't know. I am a mix. Like, everybody prides themselves in being post-denominational. What does that really mean? It means that the denominations are not really responding to what I need and what I feel. But then, we have those obsolete ideologies that have trouble responding to the challenges of the 21st century pre-COVID. Let me give you two different examples of how inadequate we are. We have no concept of humanity that evolved from what we know today about genetics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. These things are not just tools that we use. When you talk about artificial intelligence, when through genetics and neuroscience, you challenge the notion of free will, that impacts religion, especially a religion like ours that is based on the idea of free will. What is consciousness today? That can a machine have consciousness? What is intelligence today? What is moral discernment today? What is good and bad? In other words, there's a lot of things that are happening in the 21st century that we're not dealing with meaningfully, or rather, individuals may be dealing with it, and somebody may ask, is genetic engineered food allowed or not? But are we really thinking what it does to our self-perception as humans? The nature of society changed, the nature of community. What is a community today? So it's very hard to actually define what a community is in the 21st century, right? So we have all these problems, and then COVID hits. Now, I see this as an opportunity for folks to say, let's give the community the tools to rethink itself and to rethink the ideological scaffolding of Jewish life. I am very, very concerned because the rethinking I see happening in the Jewish world post-COVID is not ideological, it's not theological, it's not philosophical. It's, do we merge organizations or not? How do we save money? Do we keep the summer camps operating or not? Those are all very important questions. Don't get me wrong. Those questions take up 90% of my time, but they're not dealing with this other side. And ultimately, Jews are going to be brought to Jewish life, not only through attractive programs, but through content, meaning, and through a spiritual quest. And I am concerned that we are not prepared for that, that we are seeing now the result of decades of not investing in spiritual and ideological development, in theology, in philosophy, in these kind of things that ultimately serve as the base for that ideological development. You can't engineer a Maimonides. You can engineer a Heschel or a Rabbi Schneerson. You can't. But what you can do is you can create a ferment, a structure in which these people can emerge. We don't have it today. Today, the frameworks that should be creating this kind of thinking of thinking, scholarship, and the like, are interested in raising money, be attractive to, dealing with issues that are really marginal to the search for meaning. Now, I'm gonna make a last point here, and then we can open it up. And I see there are a few comments there. This is not a problem of the Jews. This is also a problem of the American ethos. And I compare America and Europe to Greece and Rome. The Greeks created philosophy, all the spiritual development, all the basic science. And then the Romans took all that and they focused on engineering, right? In other words, they took Greek science that was pure science, and they said, okay, let's use it to build bridges and aqueducts and coliseums. They took the philosophy of the Stoics, and they say, let's do self-help books with the Stoic philosophy. So in other words, I see here sort of a similar dynamic. Europe and Germany in the 19th century created all this science and philosophy and theology. And those of us in the United States are creating programs, are creating technology. Now, all that is good, but after Greek came Rome, and after Rome came the Dark Ages. So I don't want the Dark Ages to follow this time, not at least on our watch. And I would love for the Jewish community to do something, because I think that that's going to be ultimately the main challenge that we face. It's a challenge of meaning, not a challenge of programs, not a challenge of frameworks. Now, one of the reasons why it's easy to invest in frameworks and on boxes that have no content is because many of the Jewish leaders are ignorant. They can't have these conversations, right? So it's easier for me, if I don't know anything about theology, to create a program like Birthright. And don't get me wrong, I love Birthright, but for you to understand the idea, it's easy to create a program that is content free or content neutral because I'm not comfortable in the content. So I think that we have to go to tackle this in many different ways. Leadership has to be attuned to these problems. They have to be Jewishly literate. I think we, and I always say we, I talk about, the funder community that I represent. We have to give permission to organizations like Pardes to think, to be intellectually creative, to be, ideologically creative, to think that every ideology that we are living in today was at some point considered a heresy. All of them. Hasidism was a heresy, and Reform, of course, and conservatism and Zionism was a heresy. So, and now we're too conformist in that sense. So, I think that organizations like yours should take that mantle and try to run with it. There's a couple of comments here that I want to relate to, and then I'm gonna open it up for questions.
I want to jump in as well, but
yeah.
take a few comments. And,
yes.
I'm just reminded as you read through some of the comments on the chat, I forget whose quote it was, that one of the most important things that religion gave the world was heresy.
Yeah, 100%. And listen, somebody writes here about Zionism. Zionism as an alternative ideology. It's also like when I talk about theology, I talk about theology, philosophy, I talk about what I call structures of meaning. And those structures of meaning can be, can be theological, can be political, can be ideological. But Zionism is the same problem. It has the same problem. Zionism is first and foremost a response to the challenge of modernity, meaning. And when the world started to be organized around nation states, so the Jewish people started to say, we also need to understand ourselves in that thing. Of course, it takes elements from the Jewish lore and from the sort of biblical Zionism and Talmudic Zionism, but political Zionism is a solution to modern problems, right? It's a solution of that the Jews need to find when they realize that the national settings that are being developed in Europe don't fully relate to them or don't fully take them into consideration. So, there's no Zionism without Hegel and without Giuseppe Mazzini, who was the father of Italian nationalism. In other words, Hegel, Herder, all these German idealists who basically say we have to rethink what it is to be a people. So Jews take that, and if you read about the book of Shlomo Avineri on the Zionist idea is probably the best in the sense that it linked Zionism with the philosophy of the time, rather than with historical Judaism. But all this to say is that if Zionism was created in a time when nations meant one specific thing, and the concept of people meant one specific thing, now the concept of nation is in disarray. On the one hand, you have the postmodern multicultural paradigm that says there's no place for nation. Nations are inherently racist. On the other hand, you have the pre-modern paradigm who says, you know, it's about tribes. Nation is about tribe. You know, so what is the paradigm now that we have to react to? You know, in the 19th century, we reacted to the nationalistic paradigm by creating our own nationalist movement. What do we have to do today? We're not having these conversations. We're just not even talking about it. And even the concept of Jewish peoplehood, which is becoming this thing, you know, if you get me started in the concept of Jewish identity, which is one of the most hated concepts by me, because it doesn't mean anything, and it's a placeholder to avoid having this conversation. We find a new one now. We say Jewish peoplehood. What is Jewish people? What does it mean? What is the content of that peoplehood? And I remember, like, Debbie Weisman taught us 25 years ago. She said, we think that people in Israel and in the diaspora are united by their Judaism, but in fact, the practice of Judaism is what most differentiates. That's where they're mostly similar in the way they live their Judaism. So, what is being part of the same people today? You know, and that's not just a problem for us, it's a problem for the world. So, okay, let me see, let me just take
Andres,
one or two more, and then, yeah.
Sure.
And then you can
let me jump in for a moment, and then you'll have an additional moment to look through some of the chat questions. I want to pick up kind of predictably as the head of Pardes on this piece about Jewish learning. And you emphasize the need to value and support content and deep Jewish learning. And you correctly point out that we're not having deep conversations because, as you said a few moments ago, because of our collective ignorance. We don't know the sources by and large, and our leadership doesn't know the sources, doesn't know philosophy, doesn't know theology. My colleague David Starr says, we American Jews don't even know what it is we don't know. And so I want to explore with you what it would mean to revive the Beit Midrash, the study hall, as a paradigm for collective Jewish life. You know, my own sense is that we put all of our eggs into, in American Jewry, we put all of our eggs into the Beit Knesset, into the prayer center and the community center. But here's this American Jewish community that's incredibly intellectual, that doesn't like dogma, that enjoys arguments and debate, and yet that never emerged as a major paradigm in American Jewish life. So if American Jews are serious about supporting deep Jewish learning, then what would it mean to make experiences such as the experience we provide at Pardes to every future Jewish professional and lay leader, Hillel professionals, Federation executives, Jewish social justice activists? You've written several pieces that talk about the need for a thick Jewish content, and I think that's replayed in an important way in this essay as well. So what about the prospects for a renewal of the Beit Midrash as our paradigm?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that and by the way, don't take any that I say here as Torah Sinai, like I'm just basically sharing with you my perplexities. Like if I could have solved it, if I knew how to solve it, probably I would have. But
we're counting on you to solve it. What are you talking about?
I think there are a couple of things here. First of all, I think that the model of the Beit Midrash is important in many ways. There's a new piece that's coming out on Tisha B'Av, where I say that the Talmud and the Beit Midrash is the domestication of Jewish descent. In other words, what you basically say is Jews used to literally kill each other for their ideas. What the Bet Midrash does is, let's not kill each other. Let's just talk about them and let's enrich each other with those ideas. And I think that, so it is a framework where these conversations can emerge. In other words, about meaning and that, but it's also an antidote for the culture of polarization and extremism that we're suffering with, that is fracturing the Jewish people, really. What the Bet Midrash basically says is, as long as you can fundament a position following a certain standard of proof, it's totally fine. You're entitled to any position. You can believe that, you can make God say things, that he obviously never said, and it's fine. It's fine. Why? Because you followed a certain method. So that could be an antidote for what's happening today. You can say whatever you want, but you have to base it on facts. You have to record the minority opinion. You have to be respectful of your adversary, and you have to base yourself on a shared set of facts. So the problem for the creation of a modern Bet Midrash is twofold. One is that there's ignorance about the sources that give you that basic level upon which to build, right? And the second is that any such Bet Midrash today needs to include, necessarily secular knowledge and secular content. Like, you can't talk about the Talmud without Greek philosophy. Like the Sanhedrin. I mean, Sanhedrin is a Greek word, right? And in other words, how do we make people literate in terms of having that basic level of Jewish knowledge that allows them to have this conversation? And B, how do they create those channels of communication, of philosophical or spiritual communication with the outside world? And now you have people that are ignorant on both. So I think that the first thing to say is, A, start programs of just learning, just basic learning. And I'm not afraid of talking about Jewish literacy. I think that, people say, well, today to talk about literacy is a little fascist because you're telling people what they should know. Yes, I am telling people what they should. What can I say? Education is not necessarily a democratic process. You basically need to create a curriculum. So once we agree on that curriculum, and the curriculum doesn't have to be dictated, but there has to be the idea that we share a curriculum, because without it, we can have a conversation. Second, I think that there is another problem, which is, who do we lionize as a society? In the American society today, and Israeli society to a certain extent is the same. Who do we lionize? We lionize the Steve Jobs, the entrepreneurs, the technologists. So can we do something in the Jewish community to lionize and give value to scholars, people that think, people that write? Without that, the best minds are not going to go there. They're going to go. People tend to go to places that have that provide bigger social capital. So I think that in all these aspects, funders, the folks that I work with, have an enormous role to play. They have to fund these settings. They have to fund programs of literacy. They have to provide the structure for scholars to think and to write and to do what they have to do. And they have to provide a culture in which the community values that. I think that's the first element. And then when we have all that, then the Bet Midrash can be a great place where this comes into being. The good news is that much of our failure on doing this is actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. When organizations set out to do just that, they thrive, they succeed. And you guys are the best example of that. I mean, you're not lacking for students. You're, people care, people want. So, so that was a very roundabout way of saying, yes, Bet Midrash is a model, but a model that we have to really invest in before we launch it to the world.
Thank you, Andres. You're reading through the chat, I imagine as well. I see here Beryl Levinger asks, do Jews in leadership or in the rank and file want to become more Jewish?
Great question. I mean, it's another self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, listen, when we talk about, I wrote a novel about, that happens in Amsterdam, the Jerusalem of the North and whatever. It's cool, a few hundred people that were studying. It's not as if everybody becomes a scholar. It's really about a society that values different type of things, right? Now, apathy and ignorance are twin siblings. Like, of course you're going to be apathetic because you don't know what you're missing, right? Of course, you're going to be apathetic when I'm not offering you any compelling content, and I'm sort of selling you short, as it were. I mean, why do we assume that the only thing that young people want is party and play with their phones and go drink? I mean, why? Who said that? Who determined that? It's just because we don't know better, so we assume that that's what they want too. So, I think that the problem of apathy is compounded by I call it the drive to parveness. Jewish life, because we're so obsessed with not losing anybody and with being inclusive of anybody, so everything becomes parve. We don't talk about God because, God forbid, like some people may not believe, so we don't want to take them out. We don't talk about mitzvot. We don't talk about politics because whatever. So it's a drive toward being parve. Like, I run a Jewish organization. I can tell you, I force myself to be parve all the time because I don't want to offend. I want to be inclusive. Now, that determines that I can't stand for anything if I'm that parve, right? So that is going to make people apathetic because you can't be passionate for something that it doesn't have tochen, that doesn't have. So I think that apathy, it's not it's not a fatality. I mean, apathy can, at the very least, we can try the road of and then, people are gonna come. Jews. I mean, I don't want to open a whole different thing. The way in which people engage is different. That doesn't mean that they're apathetic. They care about stuff. Apathy is not caring about stuff. They care about stuff. The question is, we don't find a way to connect with the things they care about.
Mark Friedman, a member of our board, asks for you to reflect on the notion of paradigm change for Jewish communal life. And I want to add to his question, you write that, and you spoke tonight about that we're tremendously invested in the programmatics of Jewish life, but not the content of Jewish life. So yeah. What would that paradigm change mean? What would Jewish life look like if we embraced such a paradigm change where we did invest in Jewish content?
Right. I mean, I think, it's hard to tell. People think that Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism sort of emerged one day and somebody had an idea. It wasn't like that. There was a lot of trial and error and the process started, 150 years ago, before 150 years before Mendelssohn, started with Haskalah, Enlightenment, then led to Reform 100 years later. In other words, there's a lot of trial and error in how these things work. The paradigm shift is never sharp. It takes, it builds in. I do think, if you talk about paradigm shift, I mean, a paradigm needs to change when the when you can build epicycles around it. You know how the paradigm shifted from geocentric to heliocentric. That the calculations started being inaccurate. So they added something that was called a epicycle, that it was sort of, oh, the calculation is wrong because we need to add this and add that, and we need to add a fudge factor and whatever. At some point, you couldn't, just the calculation didn't stand up. The epicycles were not enough. I think we're reaching a point in which we keep adding epicycles. Okay, people are apathetic, let's try birthright. Okay, people are disconnected, let's try, I don't know, Moshe House or whatever. All these ideas, those are epicycles. We're not really rethinking the paradigm. So I think that we need to say, what would it happen if we want to reinvent something? I think that the new paradigm has to be in 3 dimensions. One is a dimension of meaning, that what we are talking, the sort of ideological and theological scaffolding. Second, a dimension of community and belonging. In other words, how do we define community today? It cannot be defined in the same way that it was 100 years ago. First of all, the individual is much more centric in the social organization. Secondly, communities are more permeable. There's no loyalty to a community. So how we redefine community? So first change of paradigm, meaning. Second, definition of community and what does it mean to belong to a community. Third, change in paradigm of organizational structures. In other words, when we think of a Jewish organization, we think of an industrial era organization. We think of sort of, a pyramid, General Motors, to say something, right? Or the government, or the army. The organization of the 21st century is not like that. It's more of a network. It's more a series of connections. Has distributive leadership, etc. So whatever change of paradigm needs to go across these 3 dimensions. But for me, the first one is meaning. I don't know if I went too far with this, but I hope it's clear.
It's great. I want to have the opportunity. We'll come back to chat, and it's an incredibly rich chat.
I'm trying to follow.
I'm going to download this. I encourage you all to download it as well. But I wanted Andres and I to have the opportunity to actually engage in what it is we're talking about, and to have a little mini chavruta here for a few minutes. And let me share the screen, and you're part of our chavruta as well. So when I read your piece, I thought of this midrash from Shemot Rabbah, and here, just to kind of set it up for us, the pshat, the straightforward reading about Moshe, about Moses breaking the tablets in light of the sin of the golden calf, is that he did it out of anger. That's what the text tells us. Many of the rabbis see it as an incredibly instructive moment. And here in this midrash, God is comforting Moshe, who's sorry for what he did. He begins to feel remorse for breaking the tablets. And God says to him, don't feel bad for it. Why? Don't grieve about that first set of tablets, because they only contain the 10 commandments. But now that you've broken them, what I'm about to give you also includes halachot and midrash and agadot. There's something very powerful and meaningful in what the rabbis are doing here. That in reassuring him, God is saying, you, Moshe, by this breaking, have ushered in a new form of Torah study, a new form of Torah, one that is expansive and interpretive. And I thought of this in light of your article because it seems to me that there's something in here about a model for creativity and depth that comes in the light of destruction and loss. And I wonder what you make of this text.
And I think there's two things here. First of all, yes, there's the difference. There's a moment of breaking, and and every moment of creativity in the Jewish people is a moment of rupture and loss. From the very onset of the Jewish people, it's a departure. Abraham departs, leaves his house. There's a moment of, I can imagine, a moment of enormous personal loss and dislocation. The moment of leaving Egypt is also a moment of rupture and dislocation. The exile. We were talking before about the Talmud growing as a reaction to the Churban, to the destruction of the temple. So in Judaism, every moment of dislocation generates enormous spiritual energy. And I think that's what basically this midrash is saying. There's a moment of fracture there, and from that fracture is like in nuclear science, when the atom breaks, it releases energy. Here's the same story. When there is a breaking of something, there's spiritual energy that gets released. And I think that energy, the question is, do you capture that energy? And what do you do with it? So, that was actually one of the big problems of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is we needed how to break down the atom. We don't need it where to store that energy. The beauty of Judaism and of this midrash is that says, okay, the fracture produced energy. We capture that energy in Agadah, Midrash, Halacha. So the question is, can we do the same today? Mm-hmm. Can we capitalize on that rupture and give structure to that energy?
And I just want to underscore that it's not only about adaptiveness and pivoting. It's what you end up with at the end of the day is bigger, is more.
Right.
Imagine a Judaism that had no oral Torah, that only had the written Torah. And so, like, when we look back, we see the blessings in that rupture that led to more.
There's a dialectic of change and permanence, right? And that's also something that is in Judaism, that it's a constant in Judaism. It's this dialectic of keeping something and adding stuff, right? And to add something, you go to what you have. In other words, invention comes from the same word, inventory. It's you create based on what you have, and that's also the genius of Judaism, because creating something completely new, it doesn't represent you, because you kind of lose the historic continuity. And to be too tied by what you have doesn't allow you to change. But this permanent go back and forth between, the nucleus of the old and building around stuff, new stuff that is still related to the old. I think that's a genius of Judaism. That's what makes Judaism what it is.
I want to make sure our Zoom chavruta doesn't replace an opportunity at some point in our Beit Midrash in Jerusalem for a real chavruta. Sam Heller and Shira Hoffer ask, I was going to ask in a slightly gentler way. I'm going to give you my gentle version and their more Dugri version.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask whether you're finding this argument that you put forth in this latest piece and which you've articulated in other essays, are you finding that people are persuaded by this? Yeah. And I want to just read Sam, what Sam Heller wrote. how are you acting on your message? What intentional steps are you taking? And what intentional steps can we take to create the shift that you're speaking about?
Yeah, I think, listen, I think everybody has a role to play here. I have some influence with funders, with philanthropists, and what I try to do is I try to pass this message and sort of highlight things that are being done in terms of this bigger idea. So, for example, I would try to put in front of funders the different initiatives that are taking place in the Jewish world that try to do just that. Now at the end of the day, I have influence. I don't have power. I can aspire to have influence. I can aspire to have power. People are going to do what they want to do. But I think that what I guess I try to create is a positive reinforcement circle. You start doing the things, you see they work, you see they make you, they make you feel good. The other thing is to sort of educate people. I think that educating people goes a very, very long way. It starts slow, but it goes there. And then I think that helping them go through these experiences of addressing their own quest for meaning can be important. Now, that's why I think that now we have an opportunity, because the pandemic, whether you acknowledge it or not, is confronting you with questions of meaning. So what I would love to do is to capitalize on that search, and go to these folks and say, hey, you're experiencing this. We can do something with this. Now, so I'm not naive. It's an uphill battle. But I think that the first thing that we should do is kind of stop being apologetic about this. I mean, I saw an article there, a comment there about how to market stuff. Yes, and marketing is fine, but today the marketers seem to be more important than the creators of content. And I think that we not need to be apologetic about being creators of content. I think it's important. There's a question here about the classic Jewish seminaries. I think they have a critical role to play, but they have a critical role to play if they refocus themselves along these lines of generating content and sort of spiritual inquiry, which I don't think that's what they mostly do. I think the leadership of those seminaries, first of all, is worried about things that any nonprofit leader is worried, which is how to fundraise and how to keep the machine going. I mean, most of the conversation I had with Arnie Eisen, which is a great scholar, the head of the JTS, were about, how much money he can get out of the air rights of the JTS. And I'm sitting here and saying, what a shame. Like, I should be having other conversations with Arnie, not about air rights, but this is the way life is. So seminaries need to sort of get the runway so that an Arnie Eisen doesn't have to be worried with raising money. He can be worried with these kind of questions that are more spiritual and theological and philosophical, right?
Andres, do you think that you've said and you wrote that for years before Corona, we were defunding Jewish ideas?
Right.
Do you think there can be a recommitment to refunding?
I think there could be. I think we need to make the case. I think, and that was part of my article, was trying to say, when you think about saving summer camps and saving Hillels and saving that, all that's very, very nice. But let's also think about this, because this is a model in which we can shift that thing. There are some good signs. Somebody was writing there about the sort of the new sort of emerging network, the kitchen and lab shul and all those type of activities. They are I mean, for me, they're not really the response because they're not really coming up with new theological frameworks, but at the very least, they show that when you provide people something that has more thickness and more content, people react positively. So I think, I mean, I think that there's an opportunity and there's hope for that.
We have just about 7 more minutes.
Yeah, I mean, Patty, I mean, there's a question here from Patty Frank.
Sure.
I think it's there's nothing wrong with generating rabbis. I mean, the question is, what are these rabbis taught? And as I said, not everybody has to be a philosopher and a scholar, and the Jewish people need, you know, like rabbis are good in pastoral care and are good in community development, but we need the other stuff as well. I mean, it's not, none of this thing is either or. Like, the Jewish community is diverse enough and wealthy enough to actually do all these things.
I want to push you a little bit on a point that you were arguing at the very beginning, when you were speaking about how epidemics are often major catalysts for religious transformation. And I think that a lot of us would be asking at this point, how new are the questions that this epidemic or pandemic raises? That one could argue that, you know, the Jewish toolbox for suffering and resilience is pretty robust. And what makes this different from all the other challenges that we faced? And here, I think that I'd like you to address less of the way in which before Corona, there were already major failures of paradigm shift within Jewish life, but specifically this moment. What to you seems particular to this moment that would warrant, you know, new understandings of life and death and new forms of human relations and what is the soul? Is it, you mentioned that we're all experiencing this at once, and I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about the impact of this shared experience for what's going to happen afterwards.
So I think that there's a big question here. Is it different than other crises? And this is the question that Jews ask all the time. Every time Jews confront a crisis, do they say, is this a different crisis in essence than any crisis we had before? And by the way, we ask the same with the Shoah. Is the Shoah different? I mean, some of you may remember the debate about Yom HaShoah. Do we need a special day for Yom HaShoah, or should we put it in Tisha B'Av? You know, we have a day for mourning. So the question here is, the question is this crisis different? You know, Manishtana. I think that it is different because when other crises impacted the world, people had structures of thought that helped them make meaning of this, right? It was easy for a middle-aged person to understand a plague as divine punishment. Now, we know that's not true anymore, right? We know the pandemic. So, but how do we understand this? In purely scientific terms, great, that helps us understand what and how, but is not answering the most internal yearning. So I think that what is unique about this crisis is that it does find us with weak conceptual frameworks with weak spiritual frameworks. Second, it's happening to the entire world at the same time. And three, it serves as a big accelerator of changes. I mean, I know you asked me not to relate to the previous, but to coronavirus specifically, but you can't relate just to that, because what coronavirus is doing is not bringing new things. It's accelerating everything. Think about it this way. Everything that is happening now with coronavirus is not new. It's an acceleration of things that were there before. For example, the whole debate between open borders versus closed borders, isolationism versus global cooperation. That existed before. What happened with Corona, it became very, very, very acute, right? Do you close your border or do you collaborate with other countries to solve the problem, right? The question about individualism versus group solidarity. That's a malaise of the society in the 21st century. Now Corona makes it very blunt. Do you wear a mask or do you stick to your right to not wear a mask and not care about what does that to your neighbor? Are we on this alone? So all these things, I think that are making Corona a particularly big challenge.
Andres, we're just about out of time, and
yeah.
I've enjoyed this so much, and I'm sure that the participants online have as well. You're so eloquent and so articulate that I really want to give you the final word. And just as you give some thought to maybe what you didn't have a chance to share with us. Bavakasha.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I said a lot of it. I think that the again, I think I'll start what I'll end where I started. I think that we all have very real concerns, right? Like, and the Jewish world is in a deep crisis. It is as a father of two teenagers, it is a problem that summer camps are not working, But I think that we need to just use this moment. We need to use this moment, and we need to really try to create a new renaissance out of this. And the new renaissance is not going to be just new programs and flashy ways of presenting content. It's going to be the content itself. I think that I don't want to call this an opportunity because, this entails a lot of suffering for a lot of people. So sometimes it sounds a little lightheaded to say, oh, well, this can be an opportunity. But once you're in there, I wouldn't have chosen to be in a pandemic, but once we are in there, I think that there's a permission that we will have as a community, and I will urge all of you not to be apologetic about what you do. I will urge Pardes to be more out there, giving, sort of offering the world what you can offer, which is really unique, and each of you to sort of engage and take the mantle and see what we can do with it.
Andres, thank you so much. It's such a message of Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem.
Exactly.
Days before Tisha B'Av, renew our days. Thank you for your ideas and your thoughts and your writing that's contributing to this renewal. And it's really an honor to have you as a chavruta and as a partner in this work. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. Possible.
Thank you.